Hey everyone, welcome to Reflection Moments. My name is Gavin, and joining me as always is Bre.
Hey.
And JP.
Yo.
And we want to thank you for tuning in to today's episode as we dive into all things grace, gospel, and culture.
Oh, yeah.
How are y'all doing today?
Solid. I'm excited.
I like that intro. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wrote it on the way over here. But I feel like it resonates.
You wouldn't have known. You did really well.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Just
Thank you.
receive your love and blessings.
Yes.
Well, I'm really excited to start us off today with our first ever episode,
Let's
Reflection
go.
Moments. This is an extension of what we already do in person twice a month. And we just wanted to take this time to have an opportunity for others to kind of, wherever they are, whoever they are, join in what we're already doing. So,
For sure.
JP, what do you got going on, man?
Man, I'm thankful that we have this space. I think, in a lot of ways, when we talked about coming up with the podcast idea, the big question that we had was like, why do a podcast? We have a community with reflection that's amazing and special, unique for us, and has been such a healing space. And then I distinctly remember, bro, like we were driving, running an errand, and God just laid it on our hearts that, we needed to do something in addition to what we do with Reflection Moments every other Sunday. And that was what was cool, was like being able to sit with a friend that I've had for many years and, feel such confirmation with what the Lord put on your heart. And then, of course, it resonating with me. And dude, it's just amazing that here we are. We're realizing yet another opportunity to walk in the newness of what God's doing. And I think this is going to be really dope, to be honest. I feel like it's going to be really cool for our community. We meet every other weekend, and that's by design, so that church doesn't, take up our lives in the way in which we've historically seen it. Of course, we don't refer to Reflection as a church necessarily. We call it a community, and it's cool that now we have an opportunity for even the off weekends that, we're hanging out, going to brunch, spending time with friends and family, to be able to have sustainable new covenant content. That's really cool to be able to put in the hands of everybody who attends, and even those who may be far away, remote. So I'm super pumped about it, excited about it.
Absolutely. And I know things like this, like extra, content that is coming out of a space, whether it be like you're saying, a church or a non-church, can sometimes feel like a have to, right? But like, Bre, what do you feel? Like, what are you thinking about what we're doing, the movement that we're feeling, and what we have going on?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like no pressure. It feels like it's not something that we've drummed up or we've got to add it to the list of things. It really feels like something that, like you were saying with Reflection, how we do every other weekend, even at that, there's no pressure to even people coming every other weekend.
Yeah, facts.
We have specifically made it a point to make sure whether they come once every 6 months or, every other weekend or once a month, however they choose to come, they feel just as welcome. They don't feel like they're getting shade or where have you been or, but this podcast is another way to say, hey, you were traveling, you were busy, that's okay. Here's what we talked about. And so for us, this is just another way to say, like, grace, the message that we preach, we want to live that out. And that's a part of living that out, is by saying, hey, there's no pressure if you can't make it. We don't want you to miss out. But even this space hasn't felt like a lot of pressure. It's just, these are my friends. This is my husband. Let's just sit down and let's discuss what we already talked about on Sunday. And I know we're going to get into this special part of community and Sunday, but let's debrief the amazing moments that happened in that room and allow other people to journey in that. So
I love it. I think if Reflection had a tagline, it would just say "No pressure."
No pressure.
I think if there was a
Zero.
Yeah, absolutely. If there was a slogan, Reflection Moments, No pressure.
No pressure. And yet, how important is that for us, though? Like, let's just dig into that, because all of us have church backgrounds in, what we would define as more of the institutional setting, that many would, reference to being a church or part of a church.
Yep.
And I think all of us have had, experiences in different sizes churches. I mean, I can tell you for myself, I've been a part of churches who were, 150 people max on a Sunday, and then some that were much larger, into the thousands, right? So you see the full spectrum of like how church operates. And I can say for me personally, the one takeaway being very involved in practically every church I've been a part of is that I felt pressure. Pressure to attend, pressure to be there for long hours, pressure to negate vacations, pressure to say no to parents when maybe there was a function with the family going on, all in favor of what I thought was being honorable or loyal to a set of leaders, right? And those leaders have shifted, in individuals through the years, but the pressure has remained consistent for me personally. And it's something that I will never project on anyone else, nor am I saying that that's every church in America. I think there's some amazing churches doing incredible things, but for us, as we started this community in reflection, I remember all of us sitting together, in a garage, talking, hanging out, and basically going, yo, like, we don't want this to be full of pressure, right? We want people to feel the ability to say, if they want to travel and do fun things on a Sunday, or take a few weeks off because they need personal time to recoup before the work week, dude, no pressure. It's all good. You're just as clean and close to the Father, whether you're sitting in seats, listening to a message, or going through worship, or if you're on a plane traveling to do something fun that's really relaxing and allows you to take your mind off of the rhythm and grind of, what you do every week. It's pretty dope.
And I'll add to that is like, you talked about you're just as close to the Father, and we're an extension of the Father. And I think that that's important to share, is that what we have sought out to do is you're just as close to us.
Yeah.
So even as people and
That's
as
so
friends and as a community, there's no distance, no matter how long that time has been. We watched somebody walk in the door a couple weeks ago that hadn't been there for 6 months. And the second they walked through the door, it was like, and everybody's, we love you, we've missed you. That's what it's about. Nobody's sitting there shady, side-eyeing. It's like, no matter how often you come, we're an extension of the Father. And if he sees you as clean and close, no distance, where do we get off thinking that that's how we can treat people?
Yeah. And like, you're not getting, I feel like there's the routine question. Like when you miss a bunch of weeks at church, it's like you show up and the first question is like, where have you been? And it's always so oddly loaded.
I was gonna say it's loaded because like when that individual walked in, it wasn't, where have you been, like smelling for something, right? Like we're hound dogs trying to hunt down where you been. It's where you been, like, man, we missed you. Where have you been? Like, what have you been up to?
Yeah.
Where have you been? How is your life? Like it's loaded in, I would say, in a different way, right?
Yeah.
It's in a healthier,
Correct.
healthier way.
Yep.
And I think that's the heart of what reflection has meant to us is health, right? Like it's just getting to a place where we feel like from start to finish, when we gather, instead of layering on a bunch of things that we're used to having in church, where, you may have a lot of volunteer groups or screens or tons of things going on that has to draw a lot of attention. Strip all that down, dude, and just get to the essence of like ultimately why we are here, right? And for us, I know it's been really at the core two things. It's been a person, that person being Grace himself, and then people, right? So at the end of the day, I don't care how big the church is. Again, I've been a part of big and small. You still find people who will flock to a core group of friends that they latch onto, find life in, and are able to do life with. And that is going to be a mainstay no matter where you find yourself in any church or institution across the country, right? So I think for us, just getting to the essence of like who we are, and I love what you say, and I would love for you to expound on this because you talk about it a lot, but who we are not. And that's so important too, is being able to define not only who we are, but who we're not.
Well, I feel like we're already like jumping all over into what we were going to talk about.
Welcome everybody into our world. Welcome.
Yeah, there's no pressure, and there's even like no pressure with structure, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, we have this idea of like this first episode is gonna be like this. Like, we're already just kind of like diving into some things
Yeah,
that
it's dope.
just we want to talk about.
I
But
love it.
absolutely true. Yeah, I had that statement a couple months ago where I was like, so many times in the American church culture system and things that we've been a part of, there's this fight from leaders, pastors, individuals in the church to fight for what we're for or who we are. We're going to fight against culture. We're going to fight against.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, you're fighting for, like, that's such a positive thing. Like, when is there positivity coming out of a fight, right? Like, so that's such a weird thing to be saying. So I kind of flipped it. And I said, I feel like we kind of like really dig into discussing and defining, not fighting, but defining what we're not.
Straight up.
We are not a church
Yeah.
in the traditional sense.
Correct.
Right? Like, I think if you open up Webster's, read church, sure, we probably fit that criteria. But to us, to me, I don't think we're a church. I think we are a community.
And that's so important. Do you like, I want to like pause for a second and like really just hone in on that statement, because I think it's important for those listening who may be tuning in for the first time, or maybe even for folks who've been a part of the community, but still kind of wrestle with like how to define it, what to call it, and why we call it what we call it, right? So, we have said from the jump that Reflection is what we would define as an open arms community.
That's right.
And I think for us, like what that's meant is that, we have been a part of the engine of church in so many ways, where you see people coming and going so often and they don't feel embraced, right? So you may not have the right orientation, you may not have the right background, you may not be tithing or giving, right? And let's just be real, like those reports are run to find out who's giving and tithing.
Right.
We've been behind the curtain, so we know, right? So if you're
Spoiler
not,
alert.
spoiler alert, that's the facts, right? So at the end of the day, as good as church can be and as many amazing things that come out of it, there's still some really like horrific things that happen behind the scenes that oftentimes a lot of people don't even know, right? So you just end up walking rhythms with folks, and they feel like over time, like, man, what I once thought was like really at home, felt embracing, has no longer felt embracing. And it could be for factors that they're completely unaware of. Like, hey, somebody realizes you're not giving anymore. And so
You parked in the wrong spot.
right, exactly. Or your outfit's not the right thing, right? So we've asked everybody to dress a certain way. You didn't fit the bill. So now you're going to feel alienated or kind of shut out because you didn't follow directions. And again, no knock to that. And I want to be clear. Like, I know for us, like we've said intently, like the idea from our hearts is never to shoot shots at anybody, because we were a part of that engine.
Absolutely.
Just as much as those, folks that, may still be a part of it. And so, we've had a hand in that at one point, and that's something that we've had to come to grips with, apologize to a ton of people and go, hey, we didn't always do it right. But thank God for those experiences, because it's made our hearts tender and really our awareness so keen on saying, this is who we don't want to be. We've done it maybe in some areas that haven't been great in the past. And now it's set us up to be able to say going forward, here's what we feel is more representative of who Christ is, who grace is, and ultimately how community should function.
You keep using this word embrace. It's in our bios, everything. It's embracing those who feel unembraced. Bre, what does that word embrace mean to you? Why is it so powerful in the context of what we do? Like, and even for you, like embrace, like how powerful of a word is that? I feel like it's not even in the zeitgeist of church culture, like embrace. And yet we've made it a part of our own DNA of what we do. Again, what we're not. We're, I don't know what the opposite of embrace is. Push away. We're not that. We are.
Stiff arm. Yeah.
Stiff arm. Yeah. Talk about it.
I mean, I feel like in church culture, and again, like it's not saying that this is everywhere you go, but it's almost like you're welcome, right? You're welcome to come, but you can only go so far, right? You need to stay in a certain place, and that place is not on the platform. That place is not in leadership. If you don't fit the bill, if your life hasn't amounted into this wonderful, perfect testimony story, right? And where we're coming from is with that word embrace, there is no stiff arm. It's not, hey, come close until we find out who you really are, or hey, come close, but you got to keep your personal life a secret, or, you can't really be transparently who you are. The embrace for us is the Father's embrace, right? Which is regardless of what you did last night or the week before, or maybe even the second you pulled onto the parking lot, the embrace is the Father loves you. There's nothing you could do to ever dismiss his love, right? We feel the same way. And that's the open arms. There is no stiff arming. You don't have to fill out an application to be loved by our community. You don't have to hide. You can come as you are, with whoever you want to come with, however you want to dress. You don't have to clean up before you come in. And that's something that we have typically seen, where it's like you got to clean up before you walk into a building to then receive love, not from Jesus. He already loved you. Yep. But it's from pastors or leaders or people in the church. And so the embrace is really just stripping all that away and saying, we really do want to love and embrace the way that Jesus first loved and embraced us.
So good.
So many, I feel like there's so many things that just go off of what you just said. And I think we can kind of go into some of the main things that I wanted to discuss today, kind of going off what you're saying. So ultimately, what we're doing, our community we're building, believing for, dreaming about, reflection. Let's start with, where did it come from, right? So you're saying, we're talking about these ideas of where we've come from, these places that we were at, these feelings that we had, whether it was clean up before you can come in, all this idea. Let's kind of funnel it right down into, where did this come from? Let's talk about that. I'm gonna shotgun it over that. Either one of you, please.
You start.
Come on, Breezes.
You start.
Let's go. Oh my goodness.
Okay. You lock it in, and then I'll follow.
It started, honestly, like, transparently. I think this is good to share. Both JP and I went through divorces, and we were both in ministry, and it was a really tough thing to publicly go through something like that. And as we walked out of divorces, we tried out different churches, but honestly, we knew a lot of behind the scenes things. We knew just too much about what goes on in a lot of churches, and it was really hard for us to just sit and be a part of possibly what we thought was another reiteration of what we walked out of. We were hurt. It felt like, you're already down, right? You're already divorced. You feel like you're being kicked while you're down, to have what it felt like the church would just turn their back on both of us. And so we kind of got to a point where, I remember saying, I retire. I'm never going to sing again. I don't want to do this. I don't ever want to be in ministry. JP felt the same way. I don't think you said you'd retire, but I think you were done.
Yeah, done.
And we tried, church after church. And, it wasn't until your parents, Herb and Muriel, and if you know,
shout out to the goats.
Ooh, if you know
if
them,
listening,
goats.
If you're listening, I love you.
They're the best.
If you don't know who they are, you're missing out.
And we sat in their living room, and your dad, Herb, he just, he was very persistent of, like, you guys are called. You never lost that. You're called, you're chosen. And so he asked us, he said, how long are you guys going to run from what you're called to do? And I was like, sir, I have Nike tennis shoes on. Like, I am good to keep running.
And she's laced up.
Yeah. I'm like runaway bride at this point. Like, I'm good. And we just said, he said, why? And we said, we don't want to recreate what we've walked through and the trauma that we've experienced. And he said, well, why do you have to do it the same way? And I remember we just had a laundry list of things. Like, JP was like, I don't want to do every Sunday. I want to spend time with my kids. He's like, well, why do you have to do it every Sunday? And we're like, because we've never heard of anything outside of every Sunday. And, we're like, we don't want to put stipulations on people and make them feel weird if they're not there. He's like, well, why do you have to do that? And then JP's like, and I don't want people, holding signs and rain and all this. And he's like, well, why do you have to do that? And at the very end of all of our, rebuttaling, he was like, why don't you guys do something different and be authentic, And so we were like, okay. And so we really just started it in JP's apartment. We weren't even married yet. and you were in this apartment, and we started it in the living room, and we basically asked like, hey, do you have chairs that you can bring? Everybody, can you bring your chairs? And shout out to Angel. She was like, I have communion. And like, we just
That
like
was clutch.
literally like makeshifted this room. And then my dad was like, hey, you can use my piano. And it was just like awesome how it all came together. But that's how we started Reflection, was in an apartment, living room. And literally from that day, we literally said like, no pressure. And there's no pressure to get into a building, and there's no pressure to have this grand, platform or anything like that. It was like, our entire goal in this is to just genuinely love people and not lose sight of why we started it, which is to be different and to love people the way we felt like we hadn't experienced that. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was well said. And I know we had conversations too about just the reality of like, well, what about size and growth? Because, again, I was in ministry on the executive side. So, boards and strategies and ideas and structures was kind of my default. And it was so interesting just feeling the tug of like, I don't want that to be the case here. Like, I don't want to pile drive something that should be organically beautiful into strategies on a board. And I felt such a peace about not doing that. I sat one day in prayer, and I just kind of wrestled back and forth with the idea mentally of like, should this be the case? This is what I'm used to. It's something that I feel like I'm gifted at being able to do for organizations. And, the Father just so intently spoke to me and said, you don't need strategies like that anymore. And he really gave me a revelation that he is the strategy, right? So as long as I'm continuing to listen to him, as long as we as a unit are continuing to listen to his voice and his leading, he's the strategy, and he's got this thing already figured out. And so then my next question, again, being the logical thinker planner, was like, okay, well, what about growth? How does that look? What do you do there? And again, pressure off, right? And I feel like that starts even with stewards of communities, right? If you're stewarding from a place of no pressure, you're not projecting pressure onto people. And I felt like God was so clear in just saying, when it comes to growth, the metric, if you will, or metrics plural, look different, right? And it's not about growth of a certain size, be content with growth of any size, because what is growth? It's not numerical. It's really watching people come into a deeper revelation of who they are in Christ.
Yeah.
People understanding their identity in Christ, people being able to connect deeply in community with one another. It's caring about the next human to your right or to your left, right? And we say those things so trivially, like, oh yeah, it just happens all the time. It doesn't, right? So you can pull out your phones right now and scroll through, social media feeds or your favorite news app, and you will find plenty of stories where just human behavior from a general decency standpoint is not happening, right? So we're inundated with that lack of presence of compassion and sincerity and genuineness and authenticity. And sadly, at times it's present probably in heavier doses in church institutions, right? So, places that people come to go, man, I want to feel free. I want to feel embraced. Going back to that phrasing and word, is not something that they're innately feeling. And that's an area for us that we looked at each other and just said, hey, we don't want this to be the case. And then we wrestled with like, what do we call this thing? Because we don't feel like it's a church, right? We were like, we don't want the name church to be tossed out when it comes to Reflection.
Yeah.
That's a trigger, right? So, so we said, well, what do we call it? And we felt so clearly like, hey, this is a community. And what do we say to people? We tell folks who are in community at Reflection that that's the heart of what Reflection is. It is a community that is comprising of the church. So it's not a church, it's a community full of the church, the people, sons and daughters, right? So it is not to negate what Christ, obviously had a vision and a heart for and still does today here on earth. Obviously, the church is critical. That is how he expresses. Hence the idea of reflection. We are mirrors of Christ. We are expressions of perfection himself. And so we wanted to be able to create a space and foster a space, really steward it in a way that said, hey, this is different than maybe what we have experienced, what we've walked through in the past. And out of that hurt and trauma, let's not minister from an angry place or
Yeah.
a frustrated place
Yeah.
or a revengeful place. Let's steward from a place of health and healing so that others can walk that same journey too.
Which is kind of easy to do, like coming from a place of hurt, right?
Man,
like
bro.
it's easy to,
Quick.
and I love that you guys keep going back. And I know for anybody who's listening, it's like you probably hear us keep saying churches, not all churches, pastors, not all pastors, leaders, not all leaders, because the blanket statements were thrown. I mean, honestly, I think all of us can say we've been under blankets.
Yeah.
People throw blanket statements on us
Yep.
for any number of things.
Yeah.
Divorces,
Right.
Yep.
the message we preach and believe, our
Yep.
kids,
Right.
career, whatever it may be, right? So
Skin color.
skin color, hello. So any number of things. So, ultimately it's easy to throw blanket statements, but from that place, it's easier to like build something out of frustration and hate and anger and justify it under saying, I'm going to be different.
Yeah.
And that's where I think when I was talking to you months ago and I said, I don't think we're fighting to say what we're not, we're defining what we're not.
Man.
Because we're not,
that's it.
because ultimately we're not fighting. I don't feel like we're
No.
fighting anything. If we were fighting, it would be from that place of anger.
Yeah.
It'd be from that place of like, I would go from feeling embraced to choking people out, right? Like you're just hugging them so hard, like, oh, welcome.
Yeah.
Oh, this is where you belong, and just because you're out of a place of frustration and anger. But that's like, so that in itself is antichrist,
Man.
Yeah.
It is.
building something off of frustration and anger rather than compassion for those who, may have hurt you, but guess what? We're going to do it differently.
Completely.
And I'll say too, that's absolutely right, and it's a healing journey.
Mm.
I think for all of us.
Talk about that.
And
please.
Andrea's sitting over there, or else she'd be here. But
Yeah, she is.
so I'm going to
For
say the four
the
of us.
viewers,
Shout out to
she's
Drea.
right behind you.
Shout out to Drea.
For listeners, you can't see her.
We're going to get her in one of these.
Yeah.
We already told her she has to. But for the four of us in this room, that is a healing journey.
Yeah, it's actually
because, whether we sought out to, from the jump do that, I think that what's cool about the community, it's allowed even the four of us to heal.
Yeah.
Right? So it's that whole idea of clean up before you come in, like get cleaned up, get healed before you lead. We're human, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus is so graceful to us that
Talk
he even
about it,
allows us to heal while we're leading. And as long as I believe that we're transparent in like, hey, I might not already be there. I might not already be healed,
Yeah.
but I'm healing. It allows people to go, man, I can look at that and go, she's being transparent. He's being transparent. I'm in the same spot. Right. And so this journey of reflection has been healing for us.
Yeah.
And it's gotten us to the point where we don't need to make blanket statements anymore.
There you go.
Just because we're hurt.
Yes.
Right. Just because, we talked about like revenge, right? Revenge or vengeance is the Lord. And it's like when you really think about that, when you're referring to maybe church hurt, those are sons and daughters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even maybe pastors, leaders, people, right? Humans that have hurt you, they're sons and daughters that Jesus loves. So when you break it down like that and Jesus starts to heal your heart, you can step back and go, okay, that's just not for me anymore. That machine is not for me anymore. If it benefits somebody else's life, I'm healed enough to go, I'm so glad that works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For us, it's more of this is what's working: community, transparency, authenticity, and real embrace. That's working for us. But the healing of if that's for you or if that's where you're at, we bless you, we love you, and we're going to embrace you just as much.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important to like, man, the idea of vengeance, because we all know people, including ourselves, who have carried that same trauma and hurt that you spoke about. And the idea of, we are quick to say, like, when we're in our feelings and, want to look at somebody sideways and go, man, you hurt me, and you spread rumors, or you said a bunch of stuff, or, pulled relationships from me that I didn't ask for. The quickest thing is you be like, God, go get them, right?
Yeah.
Like, take this away. I don't understand how they're still doing what they're doing, and so you really almost in some way want a father who has hyper grace even to a hurtful son or a daughter to now revert to something he's not, right?
Mm.
And so what you see in terms of vengeance, that's such an old covenant thought process of going
Wow.
after the person.
Yeah.
And yet you see God in his grace, infinite grace, right? Limitless grace, the amount of grace that we could never quantify. Again, as far as the east is to the west, where you have no limits, no boundaries, is what we experience daily, literally by the second with grace himself. That's the very grace that's operating to hurtful sons and daughters. And let's just be real. I've hurt people too,
Yeah.
right? So as much as I can point a finger at somebody and go, bro, you hurt me, bro, and how dare you? I'm just as guilty myself. There are people walking around who may feel like, man, he hurt me at some point in time.
Yeah.
That I'm asking for grace in those moments to say, man, I didn't intend to, or maybe I was at a place where I wasn't ministering from a healthy heart or a healthy mindset. So we're all guilty of it. And again, that's the beautiful thing about grace, right?
Yep.
We get what we don't deserve. And the beautiful reality is that God overwhelms us with it. And so the kindness of God, the ability to walk rhythms with people and to walk in the community and say, hey, we don't ignore, or we don't say we forget about those things. Yes, we're very aware of where the hurt comes from, but thank God he is our healer.
Yeah.
So there are moments where brokenheartedness was there, and man, he healed the brokenhearted, right? And so we are able to walk with a different posture to hopefully steward people and community in a much healthier way.
Absolutely. And Bre, so you had just said about leading from a place of vulnerability, leading from a place of like being honest to the people that are being involved in our community, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's so important in the space when it deals with your spirituality and where your family and your career and your life, everything intersect all at once, right? Like that's what the church or community is for. But when you look at leaders who are in that place of being honest and saying, I still may be hurting, but I'm gonna be up here worshiping. I still may be hurting, and I'm gonna speak a message, or I'm gonna, pray with you or whatever. I feel like as the individual walking into that space, there's so much more ability, I believe, to feel comfortable and at home. And I use that word home as a redemptive word for us because that word was twisted.
Yeah.
Not twisted in every place, but twisted enough for us that I think for us to look at individuals and, we can probably name so many countless people that we have seen come into this space and watch just humans being human with an amazing, loving father and go, I want to be here, not because of your personality, not because of, you're saying the right things, what you're wearing, the prominence, the status, but because of your authenticity, your vulnerability. And that in the larger scale of the American church, I believe is missing. And again, maybe not so much blanket statement, but I do believe that is missing from a lot of leaders. And because again, if we're talking about what's growth, what's numbers, how can how can your state of vulnerability translate to 4,000 people?
Right. It's tough.
I don't know. From personal experience, I don't think it does. But in a room, at a dinner table, at a coffee shop, in a photo studio, wherever we may be at the time.
Yeah.
I believe it does translate.
Yeah.
And it opens up the opportunity for not just being able to relate and again have genuine community and friendships, but also genuine healing journeys.
Walking life together, right?
That's exactly it.
We hear that like doing life together. What does that mean, right? If you can't be authentic.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That it's putting on a face. It's putting makeup on something that in God's eyes is already beautiful. You don't need all of that. So the authenticity, like that is really walking life with somebody. Saying like, we call each other, how was your week?
Yeah.
Man, like it was good, but here's some moments where like it was really hard, or this is what I'm going through. And because we've all collectively walked things that most people would go, I'm going to put you back on the shelf because you shouldn't be leading, or you shouldn't be, because of those experiences that, most people would want to shelf us for, it's given us, this seasoning, if you will, of like, oh, I know how that feels. here's some advice, or man, I might not be you in that situation, but I know what that feels like, you know? And I believe that that's what makes this community so great is I believe that as we are authentic with each other in the room, somebody has something to give to some. It might not be me,
Yeah.
but it might be somebody else.
And that's
walking in,
okay.
and that's
Sure.
okay.
And I think you are the leaders, as the leaders, for you to say that is so important.
Yep.
It's so important. And again, I do believe it's coming from a place of what you did not receive.
Yeah.
What you have not seen.
Yeah.
It's you're just personifying, I don't know, just this, both of y'all, this growth, this personal growth in the things that you lacked or were told you're lacking, and you're saying, you're redeeming it. You're taking it back and saying, I'm going to be exactly who I needed
Yeah.
to others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Right.
like, I'll say too, like, what's super cool about reflection, like Sundays when we meet, is JP has done this from the jump where he says, I don't want to end on my voice.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
he opens it up to the room, which I know can be scary for like a lot of people are like, I'm not opening this up to let anybody talk. But I love it because he could have this entire like articulate message, amazing, right? But when he opens that up and somebody shares what they got out of it or what they took out of it, it resonates with somebody else in the room
right.
where a 30-minute message might not have resonated as strongly, or it's like that one thing that you take home or a testimony that goes along with it. That's like the coolest thing is when we step back and go, God, you've called us, right? We believe that you've called us to lead and to love people, but that doesn't mean that you haven't called the other people that have walked in this room. You've also given them a voice, right? And it's empowering them and saying, hey, you matter just as much as we do. And God speaks to you just like he speaks to us. So you saying, hey, I'm done and I'm going to end with you guys. I'm going to end on your voice. And allowing the room to go, man, this is what God's been speaking to me. This is what God's been showing me. This is what I got out of it. Is super powerful. And I think just, again, it goes back to community, because if you don't feel safe in a room to do that, you will not open your mouth. If you don't feel empowered, you will not open your mouth to speak anything.
Safety.
And it is safe. It's a safe space.
So good.
And they're empowered to do it. So I appreciate you doing that.
No, I appreciate you saying that. That's really sweet of you. And it's something that, honestly, I think I'm getting more credit than I deserve for it. But it is special to be able to share that space with you and have our hearts in that way be echoed, because I feel like we both have felt that way about it. Same with you with worship, right? You are someone who has a ton of gifting in worship. And I will say one of the most amazing things to watch is your heart being poured out every single week, with priority for others being able to develop their gifts above your own, right? So you will be the first to put someone ahead of yourself, or even say, hey, I don't need to sing, right? Because there are other beautiful voices, gifted voices in the room that God's pouring through just as much, right? And that's the beauty of community, right? Like we talked about it recently, and, I will give one scripture and that's it. Because this is for us to be able to speak to the gospel. So there was one thing that we did talk about recently that I think ties into this, and it came to heart, but it was Romans 1, verses 11 through 12. But this is Paul speaking. He was saying, like paraphrasing, basically, like, I really look forward to meeting with you in person. And again, I think in today's culture, it's so easy for us to connect over screens, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There are gifted consultants and artists and creatives who really have a heart to allow people to connect digitally through screens, and that's amazing. But there is something unique and special when we gather face to face in moments with each other in community, and that's what Paul was speaking to. Like, I look forward to being able to like connect, do life together in person. And he was saying, like, knowing that my spiritual gift, his gift that he had, would benefit people that he was around in a really great manner. And he goes on to say that basically it'll establish them in their faith, right? And understanding who they are in Christ and the revelation of the gospel. And I think that's so important, right? So we end in those moments at the end of reflection, the heart behind worship to push others ahead of yourself is to say, like, we view people as gifts, not rewards. There is a difference, right? So to be in a lot of the institutional churches that I have been a part of since I can remember being young, people oftentimes, not in every context, so again, I will say that not every context, have been treated like rewards, right? And what is a reward? A reward is something that you get for good behavior, for performance. And that is nothing more than no covenant thinking. Yeah. Because it's not about what I've done or what I do. It's about what Christ has done and what he ultimately has completed on my behalf. And so the beauty of being able to look at people through that lens of saying, you're not a reward, you are not someone that I'm going to put on a platform for good behavior, good performance. You're a gift, right? You carry something innately in you that is a person you're in union with who has endless ways of expressing uniquely through you, right? As a son or as a daughter. And to be able to treat people in that context, right, changes the scope of how you interact in community. Yeah. It's more important that you have platforms or whatever you want to call it or label it that are not based on a personality, but based on people that you view as gifts. And so the cool thing is that in community with us, when we do gather every other Sunday, to end on the gifts in the room.
Come on, gifts.
And trusting that God is working uniquely in and through them, expressing in and through them in mind-blowing ways is pretty incredible. And yeah, when people do speak on whatever they've received and are reflecting on that day, it may be the one nugget that someone needs to hear, even beyond my message. Like, I may say whatever I said, and it could literally be one response during that reflection time that someone hears from another gift in the room that sets it off, right? That changes the scope of like how their week looks and ultimately how their lives look. So it's pretty special.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to, finally get this thing off the ground and start opening up discussions and talking.
Here, I'll pass over a high five.
There you go.
Virtual high five.
But the other hand, there we go. If you're listening, you just missed one of the worst high fives you've ever seen in your life. Go to the video version. You'll get to see it
3 times.
You didn't miss anything.
But what I really wanted to do with this first one is open up like the background, what we do, why we do what we do, and give really just a behind the scenes look at reflection. And if you've attended once or have thought about coming or you live forever away, we miss you. Come on.
We love you.
We'll ask you where you've been,
If you
but not
come
a weird way.
to reflection, you can definitely sit right next to us or you guys.
Yes. Yeah.
You can sit anywhere you want.
Sit anywhere you want.
I would love for you to sit next to us.
Yeah, come sit with us. You can sit with us.
Yeah.
But I don't believe, again, as you're saying, as you just said, ending it with have scripture in here. But I want to end it with an encouragement.
Yeah, it's good.
From either one of you. Just speak to who's listening right now. What's on your heart? End with an encouragement. Because, ultimately, we never know what anybody's walking through, right? We're not going to pretend to. Yeah. But we know that the gospel, grace, Christ himself abiding within them is enough. And I believe that in these moments, getting to just remind them of that, whoever you may be, wherever you are, we love you, but I think you need to hear something today.
Yeah. You want to go? Okay, then I'll go. That's all good. And you piggyback on anything that I share. Yeah. I just feel led to say to whomever's listening or watching that your pain isn't present or permanent. And what I mean by that is when you are walking through deep levels of pain or trauma, you can have periods of your life or, even spaces in your life where you feel like, man, like my pain is possibly more present than the Father, possibly more permanent than, what ultimately it needs to be or will be. Pain there's storms, right? And storms come and go. But there is a person who is ever present more than your pain will ever be. So let this be a moment where you pause and take some time to really reflect on what you're walking through and realize that it's not as present as you think. There is one who is in you, that being Jesus, grace, the one who heals your broken heart, who says, I am ever present more than your pain could ever be. And in that pain, he's able to produce incredible purpose. And know that it's not permanent. It is much like a storm. The forecast may be rainy, may be gloomy, may be overcast today, but trust and know that, the goodness of God, the grace of God is such where it's renewed fresh daily, right? His goodness is something you will taste and see in your living days. So trust and know that whatever you have walked through, if it's church hurt, if it's trauma that you've experienced from family, if it's things that you may be walking through on a job or in a career that you hold, trust and know that it's not more present than the Father is with you at this very moment, and it's not permanent as well. God is so faithful. He is so good. He's not only the one who will sit with you as you're crying, but he's the one that's going to rejoice with you as you overcome and you maintain victory in those areas. So just continue to walk it out. Trust the Lord. Rest. That's the whole point of the gospel, is that it's a message of rest. Rest in the fact that God's got it. Rest in the fact that he goes before you, he trails behind you, and matter of fact, he occupies all the space around you. That's the best place you can be. You are right in the heart, the very center of what God's called you to do, and ultimately what his will and plan is for your life, because the will of God is a person, not a place. So you are in the best place you can be, and I trust and know that God's going to do some amazing things in and through your life.
That's really good. And I'm glad we're on the same page, because I had felt like, man, the Lord wants me to write a song about, like, it's not always going to be like this, which is exactly what you talked about. But I'll also add, like, peace in the middle of pain. Like, that's what I'm believing for whoever's walking through that. We had somebody tell us when we were going through, like, the deepest, darkest valley, where every day felt gloomy and every day felt like it carried something dark, and a lot of trauma. And this person, if they're listening, they know who they are, but they said, you're going to get to a point where you are experiencing days of grace and laughter and brightness, and the sun's out, and you have to then let go of the dark days, because you're so used to the dark days. You have to let go of those to experience, that peace and the goodness. And we're walking in that now, but I remember then what the darkness felt like. And so if nobody's told you, it's not going to stay like this. It's not always going to be dark. It's not always going to be, trauma filled, but there is so much goodness and grace and peace, even in the midst of those days. But we are believing for bright days, for good news, for favor, open doors over you. Like you said, whatever area it is, that's what we're believing.
Yeah.
Well, thank y'all both for sharing that. It's a great word. Peace in the midst of pain. Receive it today. Thank you guys for joining us today for Reflection Moments, Episode 1. I've been Gavin. This has been
JP.
And Bre.
Breezy.
Wonderful. I didn't mean to say your name. I meant to say point at you. We'll keep it in there. I like that.
Hey, it's all good.
Go ahead and follow us on Instagram at reflectionglobal.com to follow. .com. What is wrong with me? Why can't I end?
Hey, don't worry about it.
Jesus,
it's all
Christ
good. No
Lord.
pressure. No pressure.
Yeah, I'm keeping.
Okay.
I'm keeping this in here.
You should.
Future Gavin's gonna hate me for saying that, but I'm gonna keep this in here.
.org.com.
.org. Follow us on Instagram at Reflection Global. Follow us, like our stuff. We'd love to see you there. Come visit us sometime if you're in. Come sit with us if you're in the Dallas Metroplex. We'd love to see you sometime.
For sure.
The address is on there.
But no pressure.
Yeah.
First and thirds.
Yes. As it stands.
That is what we do. And if there's a fifth, we take it off.
Yes. They get 2 weeks off. We love you wherever you are. Enjoy your day. We'll see you next time.